one way of looking at school, the institution of school, is that it's really just like a bundle of jobs that are offered to you as a parent to be done for your kids, right? Or offered to your kids. So those jobs can be teach my kid to read. It could be teach them math in whatever way the school is teaching math. It can be help build some self-esteem and confidence, help them make some friends, whatever. My contention is that schools try really hard to do all these jobs equally well for all kids, and it's a completely impossible task. Like, there's no way that any school can do every one of these jobs at a very high level for every single kid with all their different hopes and dreams and circumstances and inclinations and so on. So my view is, like, actually, like, some of these jobs ought to be done better outside of school. We can complement school with, or in some cases, you might want to substitute parts of school with far better ways of doing things for your kids. Like, if the main feedback loop kids are getting is whatever the school puts in front of them, then that's what kids are going to respond to. And so I think we can start to introduce other ways for kids to get positive feedback. I keep just stressing the point that dojo is a small pond, and it's very different to being in a big pond, right? When you're in a small pond, all that matters is the growth rate of the pond. Because if the pond grows, it's going to be strictly better for you in every dimension: learning, comp, purpose, network, etc., etc.
Hi everyone, welcome to Founders in Arms with me, Immad, Akhund, co-founder and CEO of Mercury.
And I'm Suri, co-founder of Lima and Tribe. And today we have with us Sam Chaudhary, the co-founder and CEO of Class Dojo. Class Dojo is used by over 50 million students in over 180 countries. Sam, welcome to the show. You and I have known each other probably for the most of, I've known anyone in Silicon Valley, over maybe almost 30 years. I don't even know. It's something like that, right? Since elementary school.
Yeah.
Wait, did you go to the same elementary school?
I think it was middle school for me. Probably from about age 13 or so.
Age
a long
13,
time.
From Abu Dhabi.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so random.
Yeah, I moved there as a teenager, and Roger's one of the people I met, so pretty well.
Did you keep up all that time, or like you kind of reconnected in the startup world?
Reconnected. I think we reconnected. Yeah, he pinged me when he went to Cambridge. Is that right?
Yeah, I did my undergrad there, but I think we reconnected when you were just doing YC or just finished YC or something like that.
Yep. We came to the Bay Area.
Did you both know you'll be entrepreneurs back then, or you had no idea?
I didn't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
What did you think you would do?
I thought I was going to be a doctor because my parents told me I had to be a doctor. Yeah,
your parents were like, "Doctor, go."
Up until undergrad. Yeah.
Proud. Yeah.
How about you?
How many years were you a disappointment to your parents, Raj?
Yeah, I probably still am,
It's not too late.
Yeah.
I feel like at some point you get like some media coverage and the parents like, oh, maybe he's like not going to die in the streets. Like I can.
Yeah.
I didn't have, I had like very weird obsessions. I had like these phases of obsession. Like I remember when I was a bit younger, I was maybe 8 or 9, I got really into dinosaurs for like a year. And it was just, it was like the only thing that mattered to me. And I went super deep. I did all kinds of like projects on it. Then I had one on space. I got very deep on that. And so I just had like a series of obsessions. Then when I got to college, I'd assumed I was just going to like be an academic, a mathematician, an economist. And I thought I'd just continue with that.
But what changed? That's a big change.
Yeah, it is a big change. Well, I think, so the school we went to was kind of an odd school in a lot of different ways. But one of the ways it was odd, which I hadn't appreciated at the time, was that they really insisted on kids teaching as well as learning.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was
teaching younger kids or teaching peers?
Peers, younger kids, like all of it. So I think many of us, Roger, you probably did this as well, but many of us ended up teaching for like a good amount of time there. This is like after school, lunchtime.
We were forced to. You didn't have a choice.
Varying degrees of.
Is this the way to like reduce teacher salaries? That just like half the teaching is done by students?
Well, at the time it was one of those things that was just so normal in a way. Like I didn't realize at the time that it wasn't like a normal thing.
Yeah.
I was just like teaching a bunch, and you were in that environment. And then I got to college, and I thought I was going to do a PhD. And then one of my professors was like, "Hey, I know you did that weird teaching thing at your school. A friend of mine needs some help at his school. Would you go and help him out?" And so I ended up going to this very nice old school in the UK and helping them out for like a little bit with their economics and math department. but all the conventional things you're supposed to do, like, you're supposed to go and be a consultant or a banker or whatever, I'd kind of turned down. McKinsey had come back around, and they were starting an education group. And they were like, look, you're into education stuff. Do you want to, basically talk to a bunch of education ministers and get to understand public education systems? And at age 20, that sounded just like intoxicating. I don't think McKinsey adds very much value in those discussions, but I got to learn a lot, right? And then I left, and while I was at McKinsey, I met a couple of friends who were at Oxford Entrepreneurs, and they were like, "Hey, do you know about this Hacker News thing?" And I was like, "No, what's that?" And we started getting really into reading Hacker News together. And there was like a small group of people in London that were really into following Hacker News and YC.
Wait, is this 2006?
It was I think it was a little later. It was like 2009, maybe 8, 9, 10, something like that.
Okay, just after my time. But the Oxford entrepreneurs were a great bunch. That's partly how I moved to San Francisco, because there was a group there, and there was like basically 3 or 4 Oxford entrepreneurs that had ended up moving to do Y Combinator, and I was like, okay, I should just do this. And I mean, they were like a real inspiration.
Exactly the same. So I met a bunch of these guys, and we kind of fell in together, and we were like, oh, I guess we're gonna dive into starting something that could have some impact in the world. Like I think it just opened an aperture of, oh, you don't have to just take a job. You can go and build things, and that's a good thing you can do.
Did you actually do Y Combinator?
So what we were applying to YC, my co-founder was emailing with PG actually, because he would write back in the day very quickly. But they just started an education incubator like on the side called Immad.
Jeff Ralston, right?
Yeah, Ralston and Tim Brady and a few others. And so we were like, oh my God, like, we want to do an education idea. And this was like the perfect moment. We're like, okay, well, everything's kind of colliding here. I think like a year or two later, that rolled back into YC. And, so now I think officially we're like a YC summer 2012 or something company.
Oh, cool. So you did that.
Yeah.
And do you guys know each other? Do you guys know before this podcast?
I think maybe we've met once.
Oh, wow.
Not well. I
It's
think we're
like
on the
you
same
have-
WhatsApp channels.
Yeah. There's a couple of those later stage founder ones I think we're on.
Yeah,
All
kind of
the
surprising.
UK ones.
Yeah.
Are you in the Bay Area?
Me? Yeah,
Yeah.
in San Francisco,
Yeah,
yeah.
you guys are so close. Yeah, and you have
Where
such
are you?
similar
Are you like
journeys.
next door?
Downstairs. Yeah. No, it's weird. It's so we did the incubator, and then we moved up to San Francisco.
Yeah.
I would say me and my co-founder, and we lived in this startup apartment in the Mission.
Mhm.
I think this is a very classic kind of story. We found this like 2-bedroom place there, and we lived there for ages together. I think like 6 or 7 years. We're living there together, working together every day at the office. He moved out. I stayed there just out of stubbornness until basically the end of last year. So that was in the Mission.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You've been in the same office for 13 years?
Same room, same
Okay,
apartment.
but the office moved out. Okay.
The
Well,
office had to move out, but the same house. And then
well, was
we
it
just-
nice?
I mean, it was fine. Like honestly, we were very grateful for it. But in reality, the reason we chose it was one of our first engineers was an engineer, a Stanford kid. He was like, before we moved to the city, he was like, guys, I'm going to show you an amazing time. You have to come to this place called the Elba Room in the
Okay.
Mission.
Yeah.
And we were like, this is the center of nightlife, turns out, in the city. So in our 20s, we're like, we've got to be near the Elba Room. So we just picked this apartment near the Elba Room, and it turned out to be a good bet. But yeah.
I mean, I guess you were locked into some cheap rent as well.
Oh my God, the rent control is hard to get away from. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a real. You've done this for almost 14 years. Like, that's a long journey. I did my previous startup for 8 years, and it felt like an eternity. So, like, how have you kept like motivated and engaged? Like, how has that been for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it comes in kind of waves. Honestly, I think so. We picked a very strange, I think important for us, but strange strategy, honestly, from the start. So, we had this enormous mission that we want to give every kid an education they love. And then you get into what's the first step that you can actually take. And very early on at the incubator, we ran into Reid Hoffman. And we've been talking with him about this idea of reaching kids at scale. And I don't know if you guys know this, but education companies generally don't seem to be very successful. They don't reach
yeah.
scale. They're tough.
It's like a tar pit idea, right? It's like,
That's
don't do education.
Totally, right? Everyone's like, don't do this. And we had the same thing when we moved here. We're like, man, this seems like a hard bad industry. But you look a bit harder at it, and basically most people have taken, except for one company, which you'll know, which is Duolingo, most companies have really taken the same approach, which is they turn up at schools and they just like sell stuff to schools. And there's lots of problems with this that we can get into, but it really prevents you from getting to scale very quickly. So our view was, well, we need to do something different to that. We are in fact going to serve the real customers of education. We're going to serve parents, and that from day one meant we were going to be a consumer company. But we ran into Reid Hoffman early on. He was like, well, this is great. You're going to build a consumer company. You need to find a way to grow. You need to find a way to grow to reach consumers at scale without paying for every single user. And Reid, being Mr. Network, was like, it'd be best if you build some kind of network. And so we started to think a bit about that early on. And that became the only goal. We're like, look, if we can, it was kind of like a binary bet, right? Like, if we can establish a network that reaches the demographic, kids and families at scale, then we'll have a lot of time to build great businesses on it. But if we can't build a network, then none of it will really matter. Like, you might be better off just starting a school if you wanted to have impact in education at small scale. So scale really mattered, right? And so we basically spent the first 7-ish years of the company only focused on building that network to reach scale. So we only actually really started monetizing about 4 or 5 years ago. So it's been a very
Oh,
steep.
no way.
Yeah.
And you were just raised enough money to get to
Well,
that level?
it was kind of this weird deal, right? Because, well, one, we raised money for sure, but every time we turned up to fundraise, we could basically just show growing user base and engagement and retention metrics. The other side of the deal, though, is that we were going to be extremely frugal. So we got to 2019, which was like 7 years in, and we were like 30 people. So on paper, you'd be like, oh my God, this thing isn't growing, right? But we were serving millions and millions of kids. And the other thing was, we had committed to not spending $1 on user acquisition. So all the growth we'd had was entirely through word of mouth and network effects and the things we can get into. But it's still true to this day. We still haven't spent $1 on user acquisition.
I have so many questions there. So how do you, like, let's say, you get into 2025 planning and you want to say, like, we're going to grow this much. Like, how do you predict your growth if it's like all like in a word of mouth? And I mean, Mercury has this issue as well, actually. We are very word of mouth driven. But yeah, it's always tricky to say, like, this is the predictable business when it's like grown like that.
It definitely makes it harder. I think so. We've had a few different effects, right? So there's pure word of mouth where people just hear about it and tell their friends about it. But the thing that I think is interesting for us is we grow through schools, right? So for those that don't know what ClassDojo is, it started as a communication app. Teachers would pick it up for free, individual teachers, so not the school, and then they would spread it to kids and families. And the function, that the value it served, was it started to create these classroom communities. So these small closed groups where people could share pictures and videos and moments and messages. And so it really kind of turned the classroom into this like little village again. And that became very exciting for people. And then that would spread through schools. So it's a bit like imagine if you're Slack, you have some view into what the growth dynamics look like once you land in an organization. You know that you get one team activated, then over a certain period of time, months, years, this is generally what growth curves look like. So you can actually look at these cohorts on Dojo going back at a school level and just see how we've landed and expanded through schools. So you get a little bit of predictability, a little more predictability beyond just pure word of mouth.
I guess the other logic to this edtech space is like, okay, firstly, it's annoying to like sell because you have to sell to the governments and these educational institutions. And then secondly, if you don't sell to them, like parents don't have what, like generally, I mean, obviously there's rich parents that are willing to spend on education, but generally like parents don't have money that they're willing to spend on education. So like, I guess like, 7 years in, you're thinking about monetizing. Like, how do you monetize once you build this network?
Yeah, so that was actually if you think of like the hard things that you have to do, then there's hard things in every company. The first hard thing was, how do we figure out distribution here in a world where none of these companies reach billions of people or just like on a user basis. So that was the first hard thing. You've pointed to the second hard thing, which is like none of these companies reach billions or tens of billions in revenue either. So how do you build an at scale business here? And everyone throws around the number of 5 or 6% of GDP is spent on the education system and so on and so on. But that's actually like not a great way to look at the market, because you're basically pricing in lots of salaries and staff and this kind of stuff, right? But the thing that maybe the main thing I'll say on this is, I think a lot of companies have to have some kind of belief, especially consumer companies, some kind of insider belief that you believe that everyone else has missed. And we weren't sure about this at the start, but our belief was that, look, all parents care about their kids. It's an evolutionary imperative for you to care about your kid. And we think that if we can give you the right products, you will actually spend money on them for your kids. So actually, I spoke with someone at Spotify about this a while ago. They had a really interesting way of thinking about it, which is a parallel for me. They're like, look, if you try to price or size the market for music when Spotify started, you might look at the number of CDs that were sold. And well, it's 100 million CDs, it's $8 a CD. So the whole market for music is like $1 billion, and it's like way too small. But then if you reason it from first principles, you're like, well, hold on, every society in history has evolved music in some way. And it's in the top 5 interests of basically everybody in the world at some stage in life. So it might be that this isn't a market problem, but it's actually a product and packaging problem. And what has been presented here is the most compelling product in the most compelling packaging. And that was we didn't have these like good words for it at the time, but that was basically the bet we were making with Dojo, was that, well, actually, we think families at all income levels really care about their kids. But the problem is the supply curve for education is basically this like weird 90-degree angle where you pay $0 at the point of use if you're in public school, and then you pay $50K a year if you want to send your kid to private school. And there's a few things in between, like apps and yada yada yada. But there's nothing that as a parent you can point to and say, that is the brand that I trust with my kids, in the way that you might point to Disney and say, I trust that this is going to be entertaining for my kids, or Lego and say, this is going to help them play. And we're like, look, we think we could build a brand that has many products in it that parents can trust, and that they will be willing to spend money on. And so that was like the big picture. Now, the brass tacks of it, when we got to 2019, we were like, oh, well, we've actually got some substantial user base now. I forget what it was, but it was definitely like in the millions of kids, and so it's like a pretty substantial chunk of kids in the US and families. And we were like, well, let's start serving some of the needs that we'd heard from families over time. So the first one we built was actually very trivial. It was a subscription for families called Plus. Now, Plus really just gave them a handful of additional features that made the communication app slightly better. Right? So we launched that. Honestly, it took us by surprise how well that worked. That just started to scale really nicely, and basically funds the entire business on its own. But that was our first revenue stream. So I'll pause, but I can tell you about the others.
Well, I'm curious about that Plus. How did you acquire customers for that? Like now as a parent, I don't know about you, Immad, but I think about these things all the time and like products for parents. And it's really interesting what you just said about, parents are, like the curve, and like there's only 2 options. There's like private school, expensive option. Yeah.
I kind of wish the school my kids go to use ClassDojo, right? Yeah, I know. I'm like, you guys need to still distribute, because like it sounds useful to have like a strong kind of communication app with like teachers. Like right now, like they just send us emails. It seems so limited.
All right. Well, I'll find out some details after. We'll get to work on it.
Yeah. But how did you acquire these parents? Like, because if you're going to parents, that's probably the hard. Because schools, you can find them, right? There's probably easy directories and stuff. But
They
parents,
already had the parents. That was the communication app.
Yeah. So the communication app kind of brought in a huge, like every teacher,
I see.
with
Okay.
30 parents and 30 kids, and so they kind of create this huge community.
But the teacher would have to initiate it. Who initiated the network?
Yeah, great question. So in the early days, it was definitely the teacher. Still probably mostly teachers today. What we've started to see, though, is that we started in this narrow use case, right? Like, let's connect you to what's happening in your kid's classroom. Very useful for a lot of parents. You might be used to getting a parent-teacher conference once every 4 months or something, and then getting some nasty surprise of like what happened. And it's kind of very, like, as with so many things about the education system, it's super outdated. So we're like, well, can we just move that to continuous sharing? So the sharing kind of started with teachers. Now what we're finding is parents actually want that same thing in many other aspects of their kids' life, right? Their kids are in many groups, after school clubs and summer camps and daycare and so on and so on. So I think we're starting to move into more and more of these groups, some of which are parent initiated.
Yeah.
I think one interesting thing you said, which is like worth stepping back and realizing, is like, often when you look at a market, it seems small, but like the bit that's missing is a product or packaging that like completely changes the market dynamic, right? I mean, Mercury, obviously banking is a huge market, but often when I was first pitching Mercury, people were like, "Oh, people don't care about like picking a bank, right? Like it's like very retentive." I'm like, "Yeah, they don't care because they all suck, right? Like obviously, like if you have a sea of sucking, no one's gonna pick like something good, right?" I was always like, "Oh, we're just gonna make something great, and then people will actually pick it." And it seems obvious in hindsight, I guess, but people really did not believe it, that like actually the thing that was missing was the product that would like create the market in its way, or create like a movement. But like often the biggest successes are like that. Like you have to, like, the market kind of like doesn't exist because the product doesn't exist, but it's confusing from like a outside VC perspective or like an outside analysis perspective. It doesn't make any sense.
Products change markets. Like people don't understand that. It's such a fundamental truth in startups, which entrepreneurs, I think, fundamentally understand. But
But
most
sometimes they
investors
don't, right? Like I think the lack of product market fit is when a product does not change market. So like it is the hard bit of like you're imagining a change that doesn't exist yet.
But one way I think about it, one way I think about it is like where are proxies for spend or proxies for time, right? So, in the education space, and also as Sam mentioned, like it's an evolutionary trait for parents to want to educate their kids. It's like a deep seated need, and
Mhm.
so the drive is there, the budget's already there because people are spending time and money on education. So you can see that there's something there, right? There's something in that space that you can drive. The same with banking. It's like, look, people are still spending time with their banks, spending money on banks. So there's a big pocket there that exists.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, Immad, just what you were saying, I think there's something to these industries that people have assumed are kind of fixed, where you start to actually serve people as real consumers and you actually respond to like real consumer needs that really changes the dynamic. So I'll give you an example. We launched our second business we launched a couple of years ago was called Dojo Tutor. And the need we heard from parents, they'd get these spikes of anxiety. They'd go to a parent-teacher conference or they'd go to back to school time and they'd realize their kids are really struggling with something, maths, reading, whatever it is. And they're like, oh my God, what do I do? And for the parents who have the time and inclination, they'd start searching for apps and trying to find something that they trust, trying to find like a coach or a tutor to help their kid, or some extra classes. Uh, you know, that has always been kind of reserved for people that could afford that. So on Dojo, we launched this service called Tutor, which connects families with teachers, both of whom are already in our network. And so we don't have any user acquisition costs there, which allows us to have far better pricing. The better pricing allows us to access customers who have never paid for a tutor for their kids before. And we polled recently our base that's paying for tutor. It's a marketplace. 3 out of 4 people had never paid for a tutor before because they consider it out of reach. And I'm like, there's a lot of stuff we're going to do with AI around that as well to make it even cheaper. But that's like amazing. That just like massively expands the market away from like neurotic parents or probably our parents, to people that want this.
I think the whole space is somewhat underserved. Even with great companies like Class Dojo, I think parents are willing to spend a lot more on kids' products. There's obviously a huge universe of toys and stuff like that. But like I think I think AI toys is going to be a very interesting area too.
But I mean, Sam has spent 14 years to get to this level, right? Like, if you were advising another entrepreneur that's like thinking about edtech, would you say like, hey, it is a target idea unless you could come up with like 14 years and build a network and like do all these things? Or do you think it is like there's a ton of like actually like interesting ideas here and people just not enough entrepreneurs doing it?
I think there's lots of interesting ideas, but I think the challenge for a lot of people is how do you build a meaningful business? How do you achieve some scale, right? And so I think that's still, there was that thing about like second time founders build distribution first rather than building the product first. Like I think there is something about figuring out how you're going to distribute at scale. Our answer when we started was we had the tailwind of smartphone adoption. And 2012 was an amazing time to launch a communication app because you could get that installed and like now lots of people have it and that gives us like a great moat to start with. So when we launch a product, it goes to very large scale very quickly, right? I think today's answer for distribution might have to look different, right? Like I don't know if there's a lot of new apps people are installing on their phones all the time, especially in consumer categories. Maybe there are. I'm not familiar. We've seen ChatGPT to capture the imagination, but that's do you build like a 10 or 100x better product that people just install for themselves, and that gives you distribution. The good news is like you can actually build 10 or 100x better product experiences today. If you wanted to teach your kid to read like 5 years ago through some kind of app, it would be kind of not that great as an experience. And now you can build really magical feeling products. Arguably everybody can build magical feeling products, so you still have to solve that problem. But I think distribution is still the thing to figure out in education. Um, yeah.
Yeah, there's actually Grimes, Elon's ex came up with this like a AI toy, right? For kids, like it's like an AI friend.
Oh, I haven't seen it, but yeah.
Yeah. It's a very interesting one that like basically it's like a robot in your home that like kids can talk to with AI. Basically it's an AI toy. I think there's going to be a lot more of those types of interesting concepts. But yeah, I mean, distribution's a big. What other companies have like successfully distributed to this like parent kids market ed tech over the last 15 years, Sam? I mean, you probably know the space inside out.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I feel like Duolingo has done like a nice job in the mass consumer market. They
Hmm.
started to get into working with younger kids and families too. I don't think it's a focus for them.
Hmm.
In a weird way, Roblox has done an amazing job
Oh yeah.
with the same demographic. I think there's lots of privacy concerns and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't feel great to parents.
Hmm.
But
I mean, there's very little educational material on Roblox. It's
yeah,
like
no,
reverse education, maybe.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, like that's kind of the challenge, right? You've got a lot of companies which are giving kids ways to spend time online, but how
Mhm.
much of it is actually beneficial and you as a parent would want? So threading the needle of kids love it and parents feel good about it is a very small set. You could pull up other examples like YouTube Kids and so on and so on, but I don't think anyone would feel great about just leaving their kids in front of YouTube Kids forever. I think
Oh
Connect
no, absolutely
a
not.
reasonable job.
Yeah. I've always been surprised that the iPad itself does not have like a dedicated kids mode, or there's not even like a dedicated kids iPad that Apple sells. If they just packaged up their iPad, as a kids product, like an iPad Kids.
Like even
I think
screen time is super annoying to use. Like if you want to actually set it up so it's like done properly, it's actually just not that easy
Yeah,
to like put it in kids mode for sure.
it's one of the things that bother me. As I was ideating on my next step after my last company. I mean, parent stuff. I mean, as a parent now, like you have so many ideas around that topic, and one of maybe the tar pit ideas is like this, like how do you drive your kid to like X activity, right? And like there's a lot of time parents spend driving their kid around. But I saw a tweet actually just a weekend, I think from Gokul. Do you see this tweet that like people are
The
using
Waymos?
Waymos? Yeah, people are
Yeah.
using Waymos to
It's
drive.
against the Waymo terms and conditions, so
Oh,
people are
really?
risking it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Uber actually has a Uber Teens, which
Okay.
is kind of cool. So you literally give them, like I have a 13-year-old, so I can like give her an app. But honestly, I trust driverless Waymo more than Uber Teens. Like, I mean, I'd rather not have a human involved. But yeah, apparently lots of private schools have like Waymo drop-offs happening at scale.
Yeah.
I think it's great. I think like actually it's good for both sides. Like uh, once you have a kid old enough, like they want to do a lot of things, and it's like super annoying for parents to drive them around.
Yep. So another idea that I've had, want to bounce it off you guys, is like this. Basically, it's like this centralized AI database for parents,
Okay.
or like centralized AI just like for parents. Because so here's the thesis, right? It's like we all know a lot about parenting, but we only know very narrowly. So like we only know our own kids, right? So I have 2 kids. Immad has 3 kids. Sam, do you have kids?
Not yet. We're hopefully starting this year.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. So, but you only know about your 2 kids, or whatever, your few number of kids. But there's obviously billions of kids, and people have had billions of experiences, raising kids. But I spend a lot of time with him, but I don't know anything really about like his parenting experiences, and it's hard for me to learn from him. So, if there was a way to capture that learning in a centralized database, with AI, so I could ask questions about like how to become a better parent,
Mm.
and learn from everyone versus just learning from my own experiences. I think that would be super valuable. That's like a data problem, but we don't have that data captured anywhere. The technology of AI is there, but like if there was an incentive for all of us to share our parenting experiences with this AI, that AI could get really smart and like build like the best parent ever, and like teach us all how to be better parents.
Interesting. Would you want it scoped to people you trust or just like the whole world? Like, would you be, I want to know how Immad and Sat were, assuming you trust us,
Yeah.
are raising their
Yeah, I
kids.
mean, I don't want to know about like the average parent. I want to know about the best parents.
Best
And
parents.
I
Yeah.
actually kind of want to know after the kids are successful. So,
Has to be closed.
yeah, there's this Esther Wojcicki, is that how you say her name? She wrote a book about, like, she has
Wojcicki,
two
Esther Wojcicki, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
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 She wrote a book about how to raise kids, and she has two very successful kids, like the
Three,
CEO
actually.
of YouTube and
Yeah.
the CEO of 23andMe.
Mhm.
Is it three?
Three.
What
There's
is
three
the
kids.
third
Yeah.
kid?
Yeah. There's three girls. The
What,
third kid is a
what
neurologist.
Okay,
Doctor.
whatever.
Yeah.
She's anyway. She's a great person with like three great kids. So
Yeah.
she wrote a book about parenting, which
Yeah.
I recommend. But yeah, I think that is interesting. I mean, there's also like the challenges of raising a kid change over time, right? It's like, how do you deal with technology now? Or like, yeah, I think one of the annoying things about parenting is there's this whole helicopter parenting right now, and like I try to create independence among our kids, but it's like you get like a weird kind of, I don't know if peer pressure is the right term, but like if everyone else is saying like your kids shouldn't walk to school, then you feel like weird being the one parent. Like, so like it's almost a movement around like being too protective around kids. So I think there's some element of that as well. Like, how do you kind of break these kind of weird social things that like people are stuck in with parenting?
Yeah, I think in general the peer pressure thing is something I think about a lot because I think it's just so damaging for kids when you're young to be instantly compared to everybody else in the world.
Yeah.
I really think you need space. I think of it as like these little cozy bubbles. There was some paper I read a while ago on this. It was like if you look at people that go on to be successful later in life, there's like a disproportionate number start in smaller settings, smaller villages, smaller towns, or whatever.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Hmm.
I'll try and dig it up. I might be butchering the takeaway, but one of the theses was that you just have time to develop some measure of self-esteem, and like there's real like biological and chemical processes that get affected when you have positive feedback loops, right? You're like you walk a little taller, you stand a little prouder because you're like the best chess player in your
Yeah.
30 in high
Actually,
school.
this kind of ties into, I mean, you went to Cambridge, I went to Cambridge too. Like when you go to Cambridge, you're like, yeah, sorry, I was about to swear. You're like, damn, like I'm not that smart, right? Like I remember like having like this opinion just because I was surrounded by people that was often like number one or two in my math class or whatever. And I was like, okay, I must be pretty smart that I'm like ahead. And then you go to Cambridge and you're like, okay, I'm happy. I'm happy if I'm middle of this pack. Like that's really what it was. Like I was like, okay, I don't want to work this hard to like, and to be honest, like a lot of people that go to Cambridge are like spending like 90% of their time like working to try to like win that game still. Uh, but it is jarring, and I think if you had that your whole life where you were being compared against everyone, you would probably have lower self-esteem for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits is like you get this progressive exposure, right? So you can start in like very small, cozy environment, and then you maybe move to, a school or a setting which has a few other kids and then a few others and a few others. And maybe at some point you end up in like a setting of people you're like, oh my God, this is like as much as I can handle. But I think the meta thing there for me is the response to adversity. It's probably ties to founding companies as well. Like, there's a world where if you have the let's say we all grew up with this mindset of at some level you get compared to other people, you compare yourself, everybody does it, it's kind of
Hmm.
everyone gets imposter syndrome, all of us do. The next thing is like, what do you do about it? And there's and then what can we equip kids with early on in life? And I think there's some people who are like, well, you're genetically this smart or genetically like this hardworking and like that's it, and so there's something wrong with you if
Hmm.
you're feeling
Hmm.
bad or upset in this environment. And I think that's just like a very damaging and limiting mindset to leave kids with. And I think the meta skill of, hey, like turns out you can learn a lot of things, turns out you can persist through hard things, turns out you can follow your curiosity and find out what avenues work for you and which ones don't. And it's not that there's something wrong with you, you're just finding your way in the world. Is like, I think it's a very liberating and freeing kind of mindset. I take this from the guy with no kids yet,
Hmm.
but that's
Yeah.
one of
No,
the
it's
things
so important. I mean, one of the problems I have with schools is that they grade you on a very like sort of linear scale, right? A
Hmm.
one-dimensional scale. And there's really one thing you learn as an adult, there's so many types of intelligence, so many types of success, so many types of like, happiness as well. So like the but the schools are so linear, right? And so probably
I mean, it's even worse than one linear thing. It's also one stupid linear thing. It's like how well do you do in an exam setting doing exams, right? Like I have one of my kids is dyslexic, and she clearly understands all the math material. It's very obvious, but like every now and then she will, you know, flip a 3 to a 5 or like drop a minus sign or something like that. And I'm like, well, she obviously understood the math. Like, who cares if she does bad in this test? But then, the test is the main feedback she gets on like whether she understands the material or not. So I have to continuously like counter the test results and say, well, you obviously understood everything here, and you just made this one or two like silly mistakes, so you didn't get an A. It doesn't matter, and it's silly.
I totally agree. I mean, look, I think one way of looking at school, the institution of school, is that it's really just like a bundle of jobs that
Mhm.
are offered to you as a parent to be done for your kids, right? Or offered to your kids. So those jobs can be teach my kid to read. It could be teach them math in whatever way the school is teaching math. It can be help build some self-esteem and confidence, help them make some friends, whatever. My contention is that schools try really hard to do all these jobs equally well for all kids, and it's a completely impossible task. Like, there's no way that any school can do every one of these jobs at a very high level for every single kid with all their different hopes and dreams and circumstances and inclinations and so on. So my view is like actually like some of these jobs ought to be done better outside of school. We can complement school with, or in some cases, you might want to substitute parts of school with far better ways of doing things for your kids. Like if the main feedback loop kids are getting is whatever the school puts in front of them, then that's what kids are going to respond to. And so I think we can start to introduce other ways for kids to get positive feedback.
that's
Sam, as you
profound, I
think
think.
about becoming a parent, and you've before I became a parent, I hadn't really thought about it that much. Whereas you've had all of this experience talking to parents and teachers and all this stuff. Like, do you have like 2 or 3 things that you're like, you want to do different? That you're like, okay, this is going to make me a better parent. And obviously, when they get tested with actual kids, it might change. But like, are you approaching it with like, these are 3 things I really want to do differently?
Yeah. Look, again, this is really hard because I'm never going to have any advice to give actual parents, right? But just as I've thought about it for myself, um, one, exactly the thing you said, that I think you want kids to develop their own sense of self. It's so easy, especially, we all live in Silicon Valley. Like, it's really easy to fall prey to the rat race, like the comparison game here. And I think it's just so destructive for kids. So I think like one, we want to create some space for kids to find their own interests and passions and explore them and just have a bit more of that. I think paired with that, it's useful to have like the meta skill of learning anything you want to learn. And so being able to follow your own curiosity, and there's lots of ways to do this, inquiry-based learning and projects and so on and so on. But like picking an area of interest. I mean, maybe I'm biased because I basically did this as a kid, like dinosaurs and space, all that kind of thing. But like pick an area of interest and just dive deep as much as you want. It seems like a really good thing. I think the third thing for me, which I probably undervalued as a kid, partly because of the way we grew up. My dad's from Pakistan. We moved like a little town in Wales and didn't have like the greatest community. I had a few friends, but not the greatest community there. But I think the third thing is like having just like a really great group of peers when you're a kid. People who are going to dive deep with you and going to explore all these like weird niches and nooks and crannies with you. I think that, and then in that you start to solve interesting problems together. So I read about this amazing math camp at Stanford where I don't know how you were taught math at school. For me, until college, like when I was in middle and high school, a lot of it was just prescriptive. They're like, these are the rules. Please learn the rules and apply the rules. And it's only kind of towards the end of high school and then maybe at college where you start to get into the understanding that this is just a series of conjectures, and actually you can be wrong about them, and people have been wrong about them, and not all these have a great amount of evidence. But this math camp for young kids at Stanford over the summer did a similar thing where they put kids into groups and they gave kids like a lemon each group a lemon from the lemon tree, and the simple question to answer was, how much lemon is there in this lemon? And then you're like, there's no like discussion of volumes or formulas, whatever. Just figure out how much lemon there is in this thing. um and it was amazing, just like you read about how the different groups started to evolve different strategies through collaborative kind of discussion, right? Some kids are like, well, we'll just squeeze the lemon, but oh man, we've got this like lemon shell now, is does that count, and whatever. Some other kids are like, what if we do that thing about dropping it into a bath of water and see how much water spills out? Some other kids are like, well, what if we chop it up into discs and like, measure each disc, which is mathematically perfect definition, right? So I think like if I put all this together, I think one is you want some space to develop a sense of self and a sense of what you're interested in, and without comparison. I think I want my kids to have some of the basic kind of ability to learn anything they want to learn, along with some fundamentals around reading and math, and probably AI literacy. I'd put in the bucket of basic literacy now as well. And then I think the third thing is the ability to play and create with other kids, and do this kind of stuff in groups. And we do spend a lot of our life in groups, solving problems and making things together. And I think that's a good pattern to have as a kid too.
I would add one. I really like those. I would add one thing that I think is missing in modern society a lot, and I see this a lot in the Bay Area, is that all these things that you said don't put pressure on the kids, and that's great. But it, I mean, I feel like I had a lot of like adversity as a kid, right? And like just because like we weren't rich, and there was just an expectation that like, hey, if you want anything, you're gonna have to make it yourself. And I played a lot of sports where it took you fail a lot in sports. But I do think I've noticed that people. I mean, I don't know if there's parenting everywhere now, but in the Bay Area, like people don't put pressure on their kids, but well, they put it in weird ways. They don't put adversity on their kids. Let's put it that way. Like they don't say like, hey, you're gonna figure this thing out yourself, or you're gonna like have to I mean, it can be small things, right? Like you're gonna like make your own breakfast or whatever it is, right? Like there's I'm coming up with like low adversity things there. See, I'm not even good at it, but I do think like a lot of like this modern kids having like
Kids are coddled.
anxiousness
Yeah.
and like is all comes to like these like coddled kids, and like you're
Mm.
like, hey, I think it's very easy to say, hey, do what you want, right? Like it doesn't, I like we always here to like lift you up, and like that sounds all good, but it just like ends up with like eventually there's going to be situations where you face adversity, and like if you just haven't learned how to deal with it, then like it really hits you like a brick. So that's something I struggle with. Like, how do I create adversity for like, I mean, the reality is like no one's hunting anymore. Like there isn't like true adversity anymore. So like, but you have to have like situations where you create it. And I think sports is actually like probably the best answer I have to it. Like I think there's just like a built-in kind of adversity that you get from like trying to compete in sports. But outside that, like, I still feel like that's something really important. And I really like looking at all the peers to my kids. Like, I think that's like a big missing piece. And tricky.
Yeah. And Sam and I had enough of that in school as well. So we definitely, there was a competitive school, and we were definitely told that if you didn't, you weren't like top of your class, you would you would be a failure in life, right? So yeah, there was some of that for
It
sure.
worked, right? Like, as in, like, I think, like, we was like, oh, that wasn't good, but it did work. Like, you guys are both successful. I mean, maybe some people didn't hack it from that, but I'm guessing a lot of people actually like came out well from that school.
Actually, a lot of people came out pretty well, I thought, right, from our peer group, even though it was like a traditionally like very traditionally academic school with a lot of pressure
Yeah.
and Asian values, I would say.
Yeah. I think I think people it might have, for what it's worth, I agree. I think it's very easy to collapse the axis to like a single axis. Like, do you have like a high challenge childhood or a high support childhood? And I actually think of it a bit more like two axes, and you kind of just want high standards for both. Like you both want like high degrees of challenge or appropriate degrees of challenge, and then you also want like support at the right level, like not the coddling and not like you're gonna die in the street on your own. To me, I know, and this is the guy without kids here, but just reflecting on my childhood, I think like
Yeah.
I think I kind of had the security that if things were really shit was really gonna hit the fan. So sorry, if things were really gonna hit the fan, then there'd be someone there that I could like turn to and get some help from. But it was like and you have reserves in you. You can figure a lot of things out on your own, and we believe in you, and you believe in yourself, and go and do it. And for me, honestly, we didn't talk about this one, but I alluded to it. Growing up in Wales, there was a lot of bullying. Like I was like the one like brown kid in the school or whatever, and so it was always gonna like you always felt a bit like an outsider. You always felt a bit, and so I think that there was some of that building reserve and building resolve, and then sports was a pretty good way to channel it as well.
One thing I was curious about, Sam, is just how you're building your company. Something about small teams. We want to elaborate on this. Like, how do you use small teams? I know you guys have stayed small for a long time, just to keep until you started monetizing. But was there something else there about how you build your company?
Yeah, it was so I mean, Dojo's a little over 200 people now, serving about around 50 million kids. Um, but like I said, we stayed very small for a very long time, right? We were
Hmm.
like 30-ish people in 2019 after
Hmm.
like 7 years of being around.
Hmm.
Um, and that kind of came directly from the strategy that we'd chosen, right? So if you imagine we were not monetizing for 7 years,
Hmm.
basically we'd made this enormous venture bet, or it
Hmm.
seemed enormous for me because it's the only company in my portfolio, right? I was like, well, it's like a
Yeah.
huge venture bet for me. I'm like, look, like the binary thing is if we can establish a network, if we can, then we think we're going to build many great businesses on that network. If we can't establish a network, then it just won't matter. And so through that time, we just stayed very laser focused on building the network. Um, but it also meant that we had to be very focused in every single dollar we spent and very intentional about it because there wasn't money coming in the other side. And so imagine operating as a team in that way with just like, like a basically like a deadline or an end date every day for like 7 years. It's like intense. And what it meant was we had to get really picky very early on about everything to do with. I mean, the biggest expense is always people, in the early days, and so we had to get really intentional about every single person that joined the team and very systematic about how we hired and how we did culture and values and all this kind of stuff. So um, one of the early practices we took on was I was actually I think the second I write a bunch of essays internally for the team. What the first one was on our strategy, like company strategy and mission and moats we're building. The second one was on how we hire, because it's one of those practices everybody hires, everyone does it in different ways, and I thought it was just worth being clear about how we do it. Um, and the point I made to the team was that we were going to take a very simple heuristic, which was we just want to hire up. So every single person that joins the team needs to raise the average level effectiveness of the group they're joining. It seems like a very simple heuristic, but it becomes extraordinarily difficult if you're actually living it. But it's also, I think, the single thing that takes a lot of companies off the rails is you start, companies hit a certain size and they make all these allowances. They're like, oh, well, you start with a great group of people and you're like, well, we're really busy. We have a lot of work has to get done. So we'll just hire this person and I'll just manage them more closely or whatever, right? Um, and basically what starts to happen is you have great people, then you get like slightly less good people. You never trust them enough to give them the hardest problems. So the great people get overwhelmed over time and then eventually leave or get burned out. Then you have all these like less good people trying to hire great people and they can't do that. And so the talent density of the company just starts to like diminish very quickly. And it's like this downward spiral. And we really just wanted to avoid that. We're like, if we could just have this kind of like walled garden of excellence, of really small, really high performing teams, that would be like very powerful. So hiring was definitely a part of it. The second part was on actually creating high performing teams. So we went quite deep on this in the early days on, I think it's the Patrick Lencioni 5 dysfunctions of a team framework,
Mm.
building trust, and then I think it's like conflict, commitment, accountability, results. We actually had someone from Stan McChrystal's group come in to work with us on some of the stuff that the Navy SEALs did. I mean, I don't love military metaphors overall, but like there's lots of good learning there because the stakes are so high. And so we did some very deep explorations on hiring well, hiring few people, but hiring extraordinarily good people, and then building high performing teams once they're there. So it's not just a collection of individuals, but the sum is greater than the parts.
Is there like one non-obvious like learning from this Navy SEAL training?
There's probably a bunch, but I think organizations generally, from what I've seen, are very quick to let go of things because they say, "Oh, this won't scale."
Hmm.
So, for instance, like our entire company looks through, like we have like top milestones that we need to achieve every year. The whole company achieves looks through those every week together in like a 15-minute meeting. And in Stan McChrystal's book, the army did this across the entire like working group in the region in like an hour. I think it was once a week. And so you'd expect that to be impossible for like an army to
Mm.
do, a company to do, but it turns out you can actually do that. The second thing was like the basic unit of execution. So to make it more real, I'm sure many people do one-on-ones in their companies. We did as well for a long time. But I started to notice this pattern, which I talked to this group about, where I'm like, hey, like, VP Eng will come to me, we'll have a one-on-one, then I'll talk to the head of product, we'll have a one-on-one, we'll talk, similar sounding problems emerge. No one has any idea of anyone else's problems. Maybe we talk about them a little bit in the exec team, but we're having these like information silos. And so the idea of just creating enormous amounts of shared context, which might not be obvious, led to a new practice, which was, hey, we don't do individual one-on-ones. We actually do a group one-on-one. So my exec team and I get together every Monday. They fill out this doc of priorities, what's going well, what's not going well, and feedback for other people in the group, both likes and wishes. It's extraordinarily candid. And everyone pre-reads this doc, and then we talk about it, and we craft an agenda from
Oh,
it.
I love the idea.
Yeah, so like imagine freeing up 8 hours.
Do you
in your-
still do like a group kind of thing with like product design and engineering, then like do a group kind of thing there? Because like, I mean, maybe the engineering problems won't be relevant for the marketing person or whatever.
Yeah, you can like that's like a good forum to start. You might be like, oh, actually, like these two people need to go and talk about that thing, or these three need to go and talk about that thing. But what happens instantly is you have this enormous amount of shared context across the business. So the next time the VP Eng comes and says, oh, well, we can't do that, it's not this big drama. Like all the context is already there. And so I think the shared context enabling more decentralized decision making and faster action was like
Did you actually drop your one-on-ones then?
Yeah.
Or okay.
Yeah,
What
drop-
about like,
So
I
we
don't know,
do-
more of the career stuff? It's like
Yeah.
career progression and like
Yeah,
management issues and.
I honestly have like maybe a different perspective on this. I think what's important is the relationship building. So we try to get together. We do more and more in person now, but we like just working. But we try to get together once every month or two for dinner or lunch, like one-on-one. We can talk about life and catch up on things and all that kind of thing. On the career side, honestly, I think this is one of maybe this. We're just a smaller company than you guys so far, but I keep just stressing the point that dojo is a small pond, and it's very different to being in a big pond, right? So one of my mentors gave me this great mental model around small ponds and big ponds. It was very obvious to you guys, but if you're in a big pond, basically the pond is what it is, and you're just trying to work your way to the top of it. So this is if you're joining a very large FANG company or so on, roughly speaking, right? And so all of your decisions need to be about factors that affect you, the individual fish, because you're trying to understand how do I get promoted. When you're in a small pond, all that matters is the growth rate of the pond. Because if the pond grows, it's going to be strictly better for you in every dimension: learning, comp, purpose, network, et cetera, et cetera. So far at least, it's been, look, like you're a leader in the pond. You can do any, literally, there's no end of your scope. You can go and do anything you want that you can take on with high believability. And so career discussions have been a little more focused on like they kind of collapse to like, how do we make the company really successful? And that's going to be better for everyone so far. But I do think there's
Framework. Yeah, I like it.
like care and relationship building and all that kind of thing that you can't discount, and we do in person.
I haven't heard of the small big pond thing. I do like that. I mean, hopefully, any exec, even in a big pond, can grow the pond, right? That's the whole point of being an exec. But
You'd hope so, yeah. But it's kind of the same calculus. I mean, it's a different mental model, right? I think the mental model that often gets asserted on startups is the same as the one that gets used for big companies, and they're just totally different things, right? So here you're asserting, hey, you're basically an employee, and you should think about your career progression in this static pond. And I'm asserting actually an investor's mental model, where I'm like, no, you are investing in this company with your time and maybe even some money if you're exercising your options. And you should really be concerned about the growth rate of the pond and how you can accelerate that, because you have agency to do that. And that's going to deliver your returns. And so I think I try to just treat people like investors and give them this little speech before they come in. I'm like, if you wouldn't put money into this company, you shouldn't put your time into it. And if you're going to put time into it, realize you have agency to change the trajectory, and you should think hard about how you can do that.
yeah, that's great.
Love it, man.
I feel like we could keep chatting here, Sam, but we
You
should
should.
wrap.
Board.
Yeah,
We'll
I'll
have
send
you
you a
back.
text. We should go grab lunch or something.
I love that.
We have a lot of overlaps, and We live in SF.
I couldn't believe you don't know each other. It's crazy. Yeah.
We're definitely on like WhatsApp. I've seen Sam around, but yeah, I don't think we've ever done a one-on-one. That's for sure.
Well, that's a change it, man. I've basically been a
Yeah.
hermit in my building of this company, so it's only been recently that I've come up for air and like spending a
Yeah,
bit
you
more
should
time.
do more podcasts, man. You have some interesting insights.
Yeah,
after doing
I
this for
feel
so
like
long.
I feel like we only got like a couple of learnings there. We could have gone deeper.
Yeah.
We should just have you on again.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
We'll be back.
But
Thanks.
yeah, this was fun. Thanks for joining, everyone, and we'll be back next week.